What's up, everybody? This is the Hedge Mage, and welcome back to another video and another episode of Spice of the Week, where we take a look at some of the most creative and mind-bending deck lists currently being played in Pauper. As per usual, today I have selected three lists for you that were played in paper tournaments over this last week. But before we get any further, if you enjoy the janky content that I create, if you could leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. And with that said, let's get into it. And the first deck that we're looking at tonight is UB Terror Deck by Luca Clemente. And you might be wondering to yourself why I have selected a Demir Terror or Blue Black Terror deck to look at when the kind of point of this series is to look at creativity and not necessarily um, net decking. And that is why I want to look at this list because it is a little bit different than your average terror deck list. So yeah, let's take a look at what they had brought. So here is the biggest interesting thing to me is 4 copies of Augur of Bolus, which I've personally never really seen played in Dimir Terror. Seen it a lot in things like Dimir Fairies, Jeskai Ephemerate, those types of decks. Also, is it Terror? I think I've seen Augur Bolas in that as well, but never in Dimir Terror. So I want to highlight this deck just because I think they're going for a slightly different plan, a more of a mid-range control plan than trying to turbo into playing a 1 mana 5/5 by having tons of self-mill. Uh, so yeah, I thought this was a pretty interesting build. And going through their creatures, they also got 2 copies of Murmuring Mystic and 2 Thorn of the Black Rose, and then 4 Tolarian Terrors. So no Gurmag Anglers, no Cryptic Serpents. Just going for straight value plays with Thorn of the Black Rose and Murmuring Mystic, which just add a lot, one, to your board presence, also to just card advantage. All right, and in their sorcery pile, they brought in 1 copy of Chainer's Edict, 4 Lorien Revealed, which is definitely pretty standard for Terror decks at this point, 3 copies of Ponder, and 2 copies of Preordain. So it seems very similar to Is It Terror with what they got going on here. So it's almost like they took the best parts of Is It Terror and best parts of Demir Terror and put them together in one deck. Then we got 4 copies of Brainstorm, 3 copies of Cast Down, 4 Counterspell, 1 copy of Dispel. That's an interesting choice in the main board, but honestly, Dispel is going to hit a lot of different things in the format, so that is pretty cool. 1 copy of Echoing Decay. I like that. 3 copies of Snuff Out, 2 Spell Pierce, 1 copy of Suffocating Fumes, and 1 Unexpected Fangs. They're on an 18 land build, so about three lands more. I think a lot of terror decks, at least the ones going for the self mill plan, have been on 15 lands and 4 Lorians. Yeah, so this one's doing much more of a mid range plan with the 18 lands. They got 4 Ice Tunnel, 10 Island, 2 Maestro's Theater, and 2 Swamp. Then in the sideboard, they brought 4 Blue Elemental Blast, 1 Chainer's Edict, 1 Drown in Sorrow, 1 more Echoing Decay, 2 Rotten Reunion, 4 Steel Sabotage, 1 Thorn of the Black Rose, and 1 Unexpected Fangs. I'm honestly surprised that they're only running 1 more Unexpected Fangs with how prevalent Koldatha is right now, but also, on the other side, they have a ton of sweepers in both the sideboard and in the main, as well as just a ton of removal. So maybe they're good enough at controlling the board against Koldatha. Koldatha is very much like mono red aggro in its style of play, since they do get a lot of creatures on the battlefield and go wide. As their main source of damage at this point. It's less of a spell slinger deck now that Monastery Swiftspear has been banned. So maybe they don't feel like they need as many unexpected fangs. I've been running, I think, in my deck total about 3 to 4 unexpected fangs, just because the red decks are they're out there. It's also other other aggro decks to be aware of too is in White Weenie can get a lot of damage in one turn, so having an unexpected fangs or any life gain whatsoever can be a pretty big deal. But this deck also is just very much more of a mid-range style control deck, so they might not need it as much. Still a little surprised not to see so many unexpected fangs there. But still, overall, this is a really interesting build for Demir Terror. The next deck that we're looking at today is WSLS deck by Dr. Joseka. I think that must be an acronym for Win Some, Lose Some. All right, but let's take a look at what they brought. They got 4 copies of Arbor Elf, 4 Dinrova Horror, 4 Generous Ent, 4 Muldrifter, and 4 Troll of Kaza Doom. So pretty interesting creature pile here, but it will all make sense once we start getting into what they brought in their sorceries. They got 4 copies of one. I'm not sure if this Monvuli or Wanvuli Acid Moss. I've never really understood how to actually pronounce that name. But anyways, we got Panza, everyone. So this is looking like a 3-color Panza. Let's see. This is Sultai Panza. All right, and then they got 4 copies of Temporal Spring, which is a pretty interesting choice here. Yeah, after you kill all their lands, you can just put whatever card they have back, or just put stuff back on top of their library so they don't draw anymore, which is pretty wild. Also, could be it's like a 12th land destruction almost if that permanent you choose is a land. And then we got 4 copies of Thermal Karst. So seeing the 4 Thermal Karst and Acid Moss, pretty standard for Ponza decks in green. Then in their instance pile, they got 3 copies of Cast Down, 1 Pulse of Murasa, which they could get their land cyclers back and gain 6 life, which is really good against the red decks. So Pulse Marasa is pretty awesome. And then we got 4 copies of Recoil. So yeah, basically just more tempo stuff to kind of outvalue their opponents. Pretty interesting choice here. I can't remember the last time I've ever seen recoil in a deck. Probably not since I was a kid, but pretty cool there. We got 1 copy of Slow Motion and 4 copies of Utopia Sprawl and 2 Wild Growths. So usually, I think in a lot of Ponza you see more growths. I think Gruul Ponds maybe up to 4. I haven't seen that deck in the wild, so I'm not entirely positive, and I don't play that deck myself. And then it has been a while since I've had to play against it, which I'm honestly pretty thankful for, as it can be pretty brutal unless you are running indestructible artifact lands. But yeah, that's the enchantments they brought, and then in their mana base, it's actually a 13 land build, which is pretty wild. But they do have 8 land cyclers as well as 4 arbor elves. So as long as they hit an untapped forest, they're gonna be doing pretty all right. Turn 1 Arbor Elf is gonna be pretty good, and you'll easily be able to go get either another forest or one of your dual lands with your 8 land cyclers, and then hopefully play a turn 2 land destruction would probably be, I imagine, the goal of this deck. And then in their sideboard, they brought 2 copies of Arms of Hadar, which I guess that's kind of the bonus here of splashing black in what's mostly seems like a Simic shell. Um, is that you do have access to sweepers, which are you really with how well Koldatha is doing and how present it is, you definitely need to be running some having access to some type of sweepers, specifically ones that can actually kill the creatures. In blue, you do have some other sweepers, but they don't actually kill them. So Arms Vidar is a very good spell for that. Also got 3 copies of Blue Elemental Blast, 1 copy of Capsize, and they definitely have enough mana in all the ramping with Wild Growth, Utopia Sprawls, all the mana fetching, the land fetching, and the Arbor Elves. They can basically get a Capsize lock going on, which is going to be pretty brutal, especially late game. And they don't have the huge payoffs here like you do in the Gruul version of this because of all the Cascade cards and just hitting really big creatures. So a Capsize lock is pretty interesting. Then they got 3 copies of Deglamour, which is a really good card against Affinity. 2 copies of Fairy Macabre, 1 Relic of Progenitus, another copy of Slow Motion, and then 2 copies of Thorn of the Black Rose. Honestly, a little surprised that they're not running a couple Thorns main board. Is I don't know. This is just my opinion, but I think if you're gonna run things like initiative and things like Monarch, they should be in the main board. That should be part of your plan. I don't know what you're citing those in against. That's just me, but I mean, still, it is a great card, so I can't really knock it for that. But definitely interesting build all around. Um, See Panza of so many different colors now. I mean, definitely the red green one I think is probably the best, but this one definitely with the blue and black in here definitely gives them access to a lot of interesting stuff, especially things like the Dinrova horror. They got the recoils and the temporal springs, which is pretty wild and yeah, definitely really fun list to take a look at. Okay, and the last deck that we're looking at is a Black Splash deck by Paulista San. Paulista San. Okay, and let's take a look at what they brought. So we got 3 copies of Crypt Rats. One of my favorite creatures, pretty much of all time. Crypt Rats is an amazing card. Can really help you win the game out of nowhere, as they can kind of deal damage to your opponents as well as just sweeping the board. Really, really powerful card, though they can also backfire on you as well if you don't have a way to make sure that you are going to have more life than your opponent. Um, I've seen people having to hold back on activating Crypt Rats once they have realized that if they did, they would also kill themselves in the process. So definitely got to be careful with that. And then they got 2 copies of Entourage of Trest. Interesting, they're going for a 5 mana Monarch card over 4 mana one, but also one of the benefits of this card is that has 4 toughness and can block an additional creature each combat if you're the monarch, which may help you just maintain your status as the monarch. Because that's once you get it on into the game, you definitely don't want to lose it. You want to keep that value train going as long as possible. And then they got 4 copies of Troll of Khazad-dûm. Definitely becoming, I think, very much a staple in black decks at the moment, as just these swamp cyclers or just these new land cyclers are just so good. I was really I gotta be honest, I was a little on the fence of them when they first got printed. I was like, I don't know if every deck's gonna want to run them, and now I put them in just about any deck I can, as they're pretty much always good, though it really depends on the lands that you're running. As long as you're not running a ton of artifact lands, you'll probably want to put these in your deck. All right, and then they got 3 copies of Vampire Sovereign, which is one of my favorite big payoffs. As I have played a lot of Orzhov Ephemerate, this being one of my bigger creatures to close out the game with that and Goliath Paladin in that deck. So yeah, love seeing some Vampire Sovereigns here. And then they got 4 copies of Vampire Spawn. Also a card that seems good. I've honestly never seen this in decks before. Possibly in maybe some versions of Mono Black Control, but that's about it. Or Mono Black Devotion even. Yeah, pretty cool. All right, in their instance, they got 4 copies of Cast Down, 4 Deadly Dispute, 2 Geth's Verdict, 1 Tendrils of Corruption, and 2 Toxin Analysis. And this card's pretty interesting. It's a relatively new card as it just came out in Murders at Karlov Manor. And this has a really interesting a line of play with the Crypt Rats. So, like I was saying before, Crypt Rats kind of blow up in your face sometimes because it deals damage to everyone, both players and creatures. But what this does is it gives it lifelink. And that means for every point of damage it's dealing, like every creature it hits and every player it hits, you're going to gain life out of each of those. So let's say, you did it for one, right? And it has death touch, so it only needs 1 death touch or 1 damage to kill. So that means that they had like 3 creatures out and there's 2 players. That is, I think, at least 5 to 6 life because it deals damage to itself as well. So if your opponent had 3 creatures, you have your 1 Crypt Rats. That's 6 life you're gaining off of 2 mana, and you get to sweep the board. Obviously, Crypt Rats is going to kill itself as well, but then you also get a clue token, which is insane. So you get some more card advantage out of this 1 mana spell. I definitely, when I first saw this card, I did not think it was very good. I thought it was interesting, but probably not going to see play. Boy, was I wrong, as there is seems to be a new archetype popping up in a lot of decks that are being classified as mono black control, where they are playing Crypt Rats and Toxin Analysis. So that is very, very interesting, and I love to see new things and new combination of cards coming into the format. It's always really, really fun to see. And they also brought some artifacts here. So they got 1 copy of Blood Fountain, 4 copies of Ichor Wellspring, 4 Lembus, and 4 Tithing Blade. And then in their mana base, they brought in 2 Bajuka Bog, which is kind of auto include when you're in black, as you need to. There's so much things going on in people's graveyards right now. You definitely need to get rid of them. Bajuka Bog is a really great way to do that. 1 Golgari Rot Farm, 8 Swamps, 4 Witches Cottages. That's insane. Was not expecting to see 4 Witches Cottages. Definitely seen people running 2, maybe 3 in some decks, but never 4. But I guess bringing back your Crypt Rats and just having another sweeper on deck or any of the other cards you use to gain life, like your Vampire Sovereign, or let's see, what's this guy? The Vampire Spawn as well helps you gain life, or just bringing your Trolls back. I mean, basically all the creatures they're running would be great things to get back with a Witch's Cottage, so I can see why they're running 4. And they're also running 3 Woodland Chasms as a way to make sure that they're mostly a black deck that is splashing green, similar to Golgari Gardens, though obviously a very different, slightly, or not very different, but slightly different style of deck here. Okay, and then in their sideboard, they brought in 4 copies of Duress, 3 Life Goes On, which is another way to gain a bunch of life. And with their Crypt Rats sweeping the board, very easily playing a Life Goes On and gaining 8 life, which is backbreaking against the red player for sure. And then we got 2 Masked Vandal, 2 Nihil Spellbomb, and 4 Pick Your Poison, which is another new card from Murders at Karlov Manor. I like Pick Your Poison. I'm really not quite sold on it yet. I haven't really got a chance to truly test it out in games. I did pick up a playset, and it is really nice for decks with a very low curve as it adds a lot of different options to your sideboard with only 4 slots. Pretty interesting card. Not I am not quite really committed on exactly how I feel about it, as it's also for most of these modes something very easy to work around, and it gives your opponents a choice, which they're obviously going to choose the option that's best for them. Still pretty cool to be seen at some new cards being run, and this really funky Crypt Rats build. I honestly kind of love it. That's why I kind of saved this deck for last, as I have seen some other Crypt Rats decks that are running let's see, Toxin Analysis sort of combo popping up over like this last week, maybe week and a half, but this one really struck out to me as it's splashing green for a couple of few things like Entourage of Trust, and well as basically these other cards in their sideboard. So I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, anyways, that's gonna do it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed looking at these really funky lists with me today. I will have a link to all the decks in the description of the video if you want to check them out on your own. As always, I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time.